Welcome, everyone. My name's Dana White. Welcome to the Myth Salon. Well, today I just couldn't be more pleased about the phone call that I got about a week ago when I put Steve Aizenstat on the Myth Salon. I was so honored to receive that phone call. Will, I think it's a signal we've arrived. You know, you get Steve, and I said, well, now wait a minute. We already did a Myth Salon this month. Well, we can't do him next month. And if I give Steve 3 months, that's going to be a problem. So I think what I need to do is let's put him in next week and let's really get this thing going. So, Steve, I am so thrilled to have you here in the Myth Salon today. I'd like to open up today with a little poem called On the Threshold of a Dream. Every night I lose my way. Every path leading away from my waking world begins from a still point of infinite potential. I float like a ribbon unraveling its way downstream, bobbing, weaving across a watery surface punctuated by diamonds of sunlight holding what's left of the day's energy. As I cross the threshold into the eternity of my imagination, this twilight world with a mind of its own wants me to linger in liminality. How many paths must be exercised from my awareness until my dream settles upon one? Some threads cut short as I abruptly fall from the cliffs of consciousness into my dream. Other threads tie me into knots as I turn and tumble, uncertain where I will go tonight. I feel the still point, but cannot see it. My senses fight to stay alive. Memories and imaginations wrestle me into weariness. If I let go, will I find my way to morning? I come apart the moment nothing keeps me from remembering. I am only the process of being itself, being born. All right. Let's have a little moment of silence. What a treat today. So, Will, why don't you run a few introductions by us, and let's see who we have with us today. And welcome, Steve. What a pleasure and an honor to have you with us.
It is a privilege for me to be here with you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Dana. And thanks for taking us into the quiet from which the imagination likes to come. I'll just echo a little bit of what Dana said. It's really cool to have you here. It's been cool to connect with you over the years. And it's been, many of us went to a school that you built that came from your inner quiet. And from your imagination. So what an incredible expansion of imagination, spreading to imaginations. And this is going to be really cool. For those of you who don't know Steve, many of you probably do. The book Dream Tending did incredible work to consolidate a long lineage and conversation about dream work. It's one of the most approachable ways to understand what Freud was doing, then what Jung was doing, and then what some of the things that he brought to the table and some of the things that have been done with dream work since. So it's incredible that you've now done the same thing with the imagination, continuation of your work with dream, deeper into the imagination, which has been at the essence of all these incredible things you've been doing and built from all these years. And for many of us, the imagination is one of those great points of connection between audience members that are here as depth psychologists or mythologists and others that are here as storytellers or creators. So it's really awesome to be here. I'm really looking forward to do this. And I'm going to just start by giving a couple quick introductions to some friends that you've brought, and then some of our returning friends, and then ultimately to you. So thank you for being with us, Bree. Bree Beltran is the Executive Director of Dream Tending. She holds a degree in organizational leadership and a master's degree in counseling psychology. She's worked as a mental health clinician, providing services to youth and their families. She has a background in operations management with over 20 years in the renewables industry and has spent the last 10 years in education services, focused on supporting education equity through the United States. Dr. Myka Hanson has advanced training in Dr. Eisenstat's dream tending methodology and serves as a mentor for the current dream tending certification programs. With a PhD in depth psychology and somatic studies, Dr. Hanson utilizes the mind-body connection as a foundation for exploring the dreamscape and the imaginal. Dr. Hanson owns and operates Teen Forward life coaching for teens and young adults, which navigates adolescence and adulting. Carlin is back with us this time. Kelly is an author, performer, and founder of Humans on the Verge, a coaching program which helps people live in a more authentic and deeply fulfilling next chapter in their lives by helping them discover what is longing to emerge and dismantle long-established unconscious limitations. It provides the structures and support that deepens their learning and forwards their action towards the life they're meant to live. Awesome to be here with you again, Kelly. Hey.
Hey, Will. Hey, Dana. Hey, gang. Great to be here always.
Thanks. We're back again with Kayleen Asbo, PhD, is a cultural historian, musician, writer, and teacher who weaves myth, music, psychology, history, and art with experiential learning. She's also the founder and creative director of Mythica, which offers online salons around music, poetry, and art, as well as in-person pilgrimages to sacred sites in Europe and workshops at the intersection of myth and Jungian psychology. Hey, great to see you. Kayleen and I are also classmates.
Stephen, as a Pacifica alumni and former faculty member there, it's just a joy to celebrate your new book with you, Stephen.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks, Kayleen. We're joined as usual by our friend, Dr. Dennis Patrick Slattery, who is a distinguished emeritus professor in the Mythological Studies program at Pacifica Graduate Institute. He's authored, co-authored, edited, or co-edited 33 volumes of poetry, nonfiction, and fiction. His most recent titles include The Way of Myth, Stories, Subtle Wisdom, and The Fiction in Our Convictions. His website, DennisPatrickSlattery.com, contains a series of blogs, paintings, adventure invitations, and online courses, and I'll share that below in just a moment. My name is Will Linn, founder of MythHouse.org, moderator of our evening and meta expert for Myths, The Greatest Mysteries of Humanity, a series for ZDF Sky and the History Channel. You know Dana, host of the Myth Salon, contributing faculty to Pacifica's Myth degrees and author of numerous volumes on mythology.
You know, the history of Pacifica and of Steve Aizenstat in the Santa Barbara area is really a foundational part of the depth psychological world that we are all part of.
Steve began his psychology career in the 70s, when the boundaries of traditional psychology were being systematically re-examined. He became one of the important voices in a new form of thought called depth psychology. Depth psychology expanded upon the teachings of masters like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, by also considering knowledge drawn from mythology, art, folklore, and literature. Trained as a clinical psychologist, Dr. Aizenstat was fortunate early in his career to develop a deep relationship with the legendary mythologist Joseph Campbell. Steve first became associated with Joseph Campbell in 1974 at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, at that time a mecca for forward thinkers. In the ensuing years, Steve helped found and then became president of the Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, a leading school for the study of mythology and depth psychology, and the crucible from which the method of dream tending emerged.
So with that, you know, I would like to turn it over now to you, Steve, and have you tell us what about the imagination matrix?
Basically the whole history of this field of depth psychology, and it's organized historically going up in time, and it lands in Pacifica. Pacifica has been an incredible continuation of an amazing lineage that goes back to those Jedi at Aranos, writing with Bollingen, coming to the Dallas Institute, where Dennis has been a part of, and ultimately on to Santa Barbara and Pacifica. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Steve Aizenstat. Steve is a founder of Pacifica Graduate Institute, Dream Tending, and the Academy of Imagination. He conducts dream work and imagination seminars throughout the US, Europe, and Asia. For more than 35 years, he's explored the power of dreams through depth psychology. He has collaborated with Joseph Campbell, Marion Woodman, Robert Johnson, James Hillman, and Native elders worldwide. He is the author of Dream Tending and the Imagination Matrix. Thank you, Steve, for being with us. Looking forward for your imagination introduction.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for hosting this extraordinary, this extraordinary gathering. It really does keep the tradition alive, which is so important. And with that, I just want to name two of the elders, because they're very much with me over these last days. They're here now. They're beside me. Later, I'll talk about soul companions. For sure, they are soul companions. And there's so many that have been in my life. My great-grandfather, Joseph Campbell, many, many, many people. Today, though, James Hillman and Marion Woodman, that many of you know, are very much in my heart. They are. And their presence is very important for a variety of reasons. How they nourished the soul body of Pacifica is very touching to me, and for so many of you and so many others that have been able to touch into their work. Right, I'm even going to talk about Imagination Matrix, and I have a whole, written lecture. And for those of you that know me, I tend to stay with the material for a bit and then veer off and start telling story. So my desire is to set the table, really, truly, and then interact with this extraordinary panel. These people are, for the most part, folks that I know and I admire, and I really would love to be in conversation with you, and it's engaging and energetic and dynamic. So let's go in that direction. All right, the Imagination Matrix, Will, you called it out. Dream tending is what I've been doing for many, many decades now. Actually, in the very beginning, when I was working in Ala Vista, that little place next to the University of California, Santa Barbara, dreams were what started this whole initiation. They were the initiation of that experience, which evolved into what is today Pacifica Graduate Institute. Dreams, so extraordinary. I've spent so much time with so many people, thousands of people now, many thousands of dreams. I've been able to really have the privilege to tend everywhere from places in Ala Vista to offices in Santa Barbara, worldwide. I'm in fact just going to travel to China, yes indeed, on Saturday, the Saturday where I'll be working with many, many people in dreams. There's a whole dream tending extended community, believe it or not, in China. So that's been a big part. It is a big part of my life, truly it is. And now something new has emerged. Probably started to incubate maybe, 3.5, 4 years ago. Probably started when I was about 4 years old, actually, when I was in child's play, right? And engaged in imagination, truly, without even reflecting or thinking about it, just that spontaneity of imagination and being in the web of that experience, right? Before going to elementary school, before studying for the test, before the homework assignments. And my parents of that generation, as were all parents of that generation, really encouraging, get ahead, go forward, Before all that, there was imagination, right? There was. I really am up when I'm in China and I'm working with people. It is so curious because there the parental imperative is still incredibly strong. So to invite people into the imaginal life, which they've known for thousands of years and generations, is just a blessing to watch the flowering of that opening. When I'm at Burning Man, and yes, I was just at Burning Man, and many have heard about that. If your panel wants to ask about that, you're more than welcome. Where imagination is a big part of the experience, right? I'm working in the healer's tent at Burning Man, working with people, right? Working with dream and imagination, and too, the true life crises going on in our lives, right? That's what comes into the healing tent. It's not usually people wanting to, quote, individuate or, going higher and higher. People are coming in pathos, in their pain, in the conflict that's happening in their lives. And when you're in the imaginal field, how do you not confront that personal experience that is so, so dramatic? And yet there, in a field of imagination, working with dream in a different way, in the way that I'm going to be talking about today. And then being able to walk out of that tent and being on the playa, yes, even when it's muddy, right? Walking out on the playa and then being met by imagination. Everything around is imaginal, right? So how we bring ourselves to those experiences, that's the difference that makes all the difference. Imagination matrix. I mentioned being a child. This is not even anywhere near any of the notes that I have up here. I remember as a little boy, on a bicycle. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley suburb of Los Angeles. It was, post World War II, that whole thing. It was 50s, right? In the early 60s, and everything was upward and onward, that place in life. And I'll never forget taking my bicycle and finding a shopping center. There I was at that shopping center. And I'll never forget, there was that's innocent enough. But then there was this fence with barbed wire on top, and this giant sign that said no trespassing. Okay. When you're 10, 11 years old and you see a sign that says no trespassing, what do? There's only one thing to do. Find the way through, which I did. And I did find my way through. And there was a little that I could, because I was thin and small, I could get right down. And I could not believe what was on the other side. Remember, at that point in time, San Fernando Valley, it was like every other suburban neighborhood, asphalt, right? Houses, the whole thing. Behind that was, believe it or not, a trail down, which is why they probably separated it from everything else for safety reasons, and a creek, and an incredible creek, and trees, and brushes, and animals, and creature with a life of its own to flow. That creek, in that place, behind the shopping center, is where I think all of this truly started. And this that I'm talking about is the journeying in the realms of deep imagination, being part of the matrix of imagination, not talking about it, not interpreting, not analyzing, but journeying in the imaginal realms. What would that be like? What is that like? And that's what I think really stimulated my interest, but more importantly, offered the portal, the first portal that I knew of going down and under and then through and around, between and above and below in the realms of the imagination matrix. And that's what I wanted to talk with you about. That's the new book, The Imagination Matrix. And it starts, as many have said already, the curious mind, right? It does. It starts with curiosity, like I was when I noticed there was something else over there on the other side, right? The curiosity, the curious mind. And when the curious mind awakens, as we all know, something else comes forward as well. And what comes forward is a different map. And we mentioned Joseph Campbell a number of times, and he got this phrase from, and got it from, who got it from. The map is not the territory, right? When we're in curiosity, and when we're in the terrain, particularly an imaginal place, something else begins to unfold, begins to present itself, begins to cultivate. Not only our curiosity, our imagination captivates us, and we start to follow. Well, that's when it started happening. Working with dreams, with people, time after time, dream after dream. And for those of you that know me and know my work, first, hello to each of you. I can't see you on screen, but I suspect so many dear friends are here and people that I cherish, and so many students and alumni from Pacific and other places. So it's really nice to be here with you. That's for sure. But something does awaken, and for all these years working with dreams, I noticed that same possibility is available in dream work, as was for me as a little guy, right? As a boy, little boy. Now, those of you that work with me know that I'll work with the multidimensional psyche, right? I'll work, and we all do, we work with dreams in relation to the circumstances of our life, in the circumstance of what happens in the last 24 hours, our personal history. Yes, of course, in the collective psyche, the stories, the myths that are forever present, those archetypal motifs. So we move from an associative process to an amplificatory process. We do that. And then too, for those of us that have been part of the Pacifica community, we extend out, right? We follow the Hillmanian school, and that school evolves from so many other schools, many, many First Nation, Indigenous, so many places where you imagine that, hey, it's just not the personal or collective psyche at work, but yeah, the world psyche too. Remember, a Pacifica, anima mundi calende gratia, for the sake of tending psyche, soul, in and of the world, right? So we journey there, and we imagine what presents itself in dreams originates not only in the personal and collective psyche, also in the psyche of world. Changes everything. It does, because as we're listening to dream, we're hearing the world speak on behalf of itself through the images that are part of our dream life. But that's been the teaching. And in the morning when I wake up, the first thing I do is I spend the time working with dream. I do. And then I do a bit of active imagination. I do that as well. I have a praxis that I follow. And then something else. And this is the new. I go into what I'm calling the imagination matrix, the tapestry of psychic reality that's interconnected, interrelated, that is that illuminated consciousness that is embedded in all creatures, places, things, and to the universe. Of course, right? That place, which we all touch into. We do. We know, because when we touch into the intersection where that comes into our life, and we experience that just for a moment, that illumination that I just named really opens our body, our soul, opens so psyche and soma. Right, so that got me going, and I started working with that. And I was working with my mentor. My mentor is Russ Lockhart, who's an analyst and has been around for a long, long time and working with, and he's a genius working with imagination and dream, just extraordinary. I would say that Pacifica would not be with us without his guidance and his mentorship and his support, truth be told. And the same is true with James and with Marion, which is why I mentioned them today, because the soul body of Pacifica's asked for their guidance yet again. So I'm there, and I'm in a coffee shop. And, in Pacific, it's everything. There's so many, it's ubiquitous, coffee shops everywhere. I'm in a coffee shop and I'm starting to doodle. You know how that is, coffees, and I'm just starting to doodle. And I'm noticing that I'm doodling, and what's coming forward, without my thinking about it spontaneously, is this image of a cave, right? And this way of going inside. And I thought, that's curious. For those of you that know me, I live in Santa Barbara, right? And I'm an ocean person. I shared this story 1,000 times. I go in the ocean every day. I just got out of the ocean 3 hours ago here. And I go snorkeling and I go scuba diving, and I love ocean, love that underwater experience. So oceanic. This was different. This was geologic, not oceanic. It was going down into the earth, which opened to other realms of experience. And I brought that back to Russ Lockhart, who said, look, take the time and follow. Simply follow. Keep going. Okay, we all know this place at this point. You follow what's unfolding, whether it's a dream image, waking, or and we follow with a curious mind, right? That's the key, with curiosity, with a curious mind. I was following, and day went into night, and you know how that is up there. It was the big, long, long light of the day, smaller night. And I was following. And then I started to notice creatures and things and persons showing up in my journey. I was journeying in these realms of imagination that were geologic. So I thought, well, this is not oceanic, as I mentioned. This is more like a dig, right? This is a dig. I'm going under. And what I'm teaching now in the workshops that I'm doing is the nature of what it is to journey in the deep, in the realms of the deep autonomous imagination. Different, right, than active imagination. Different than dream tending, dream work. They know each other. They do. It's different, though, because now I am journeying not on my own, but I'm journeying with the figures that are present there from the beginning, those indigenous figures of imagination. I call them soul companions, which I'll be talking about in a moment. I'm following their lead and noticing the places that I'm going, like when I was in behind the barbed wire fence at the creek, I was going into places that were yet discovered. Now, active imagination is a process that we all know, and so many of you are artists, musicians. You have a felt sense, an embodied sense, an actual experience of when the spontaneity, poets, writers, engineers, when the spontaneity begins to print. We know what's happening. Something new is unfolding. The unexpected presents, and we're part of something bigger, part of a web of experience, part of a matrix that is interrelated and interconnected. Okay, so I'm doing this work. I'm still working with dreams. I'm going forward, but I'm no dream work. The dream tending is beginning to change, right? As I'm tending to dreams, and I am, I'm trained as a marriage family therapist, a clinical psychologist. I've been teaching and supervising for decades. So I am very, very keen on making sure that I'm touching the bases that need in relation to the circumstances of life that need tending. And two, something more. And as I'm going to share in just a few moments, this something more that I'm talking about actually impacts the circumstances of my life, the anguish that I sometimes find myself in, the pain, the pathos, the overwhelm, the too muchness, the buzz of contemporary world, the grief and despair and anguish that so many of us are experiencing. I work with children now. I'm actually volunteering because of the real pain that I don't need to go into. We all know. Yeah. So here we are, working with a dream, going through the steps that I've taught and that's identified in dream tending, incredibly potent stuff. And I noticed something else. Just like what happened when I went through that fence and went down, just like what happens when I'm in the wilderness place, or when I'm in, even at Burning Man on occasion, many occasions, where something bigger than comes forward and awakens from the inside out, and curiosity enlivens, right? There's a portal. There are portals that are available. And dreams, I've discovered in each and every dream, offer a portal into the autonomous imagination, into the place of the matrix of imagining. Remember Jung, right? I really got a sense of this when I was in bowling, and a number of you heard the story, so I'm not going to elaborate, but I had the privilege of being in the tower and, walking up, and the moon was coming off Lake Zurich and just illuminated, nobody was allowed in. And I happened to know a family member, and we didn't sneak in. He grew up there. So he just invited me in, gave me a bottle of champagne. He had a bottle of champagne. This was after a big gala reception that was happening there. He was drinking away. I was just like in awe. So I'm drinking that much. I was just following his lead. And I get up and, I see this image of Philemon, right on one of the walls, different than the Red Book, different than that figure Philemon, similar in appearance, but very different expression. And the moonlight illuminated the figure. And I was there. I sat there for over, I don't know, it was out of time. And I got it. I just got it. I probably learned as much around Jungian psychology as I ever have learned. And I studied with Lionel and with Dennis and others when we were working with the Red Book. I mean, it's extraordinary. But there's something that happened in that moment that invited me into a different kind of journeying. And he said too, we misread this thing of, being in the process of active imagination. It really isn't a guided imagery, as we know. It's not active imagination. It's the imagination that is in and of itself active, is what he was talking about, that has a life of its own, that is a world in and of itself with the figures and the images that come forward. So I started a process. And the process I started, as I named, for me, was the dig. When I'm working with groups, which I've been doing a lot recently, everybody finds their own name. They do, their own way. But the most important part, and for me, the most important part, is in the morning, when I bring myself into this place after the dream work, and I do a kind of quick guided imagery piece, because I want to remember each morning the things that are difficult and challenging in my life and the people that I care about and love that support me. I want to remember them. So I do a piece about that. It opens my heart, my love, my care, and I breathe. So in that process, 3 different occasions, I bring my awareness and attention to body and breath. Right? And then for me, it goes like this. The call goes out. The gathering is happening. And I pause. I'm not in my rational mind now. I'm not. I'm not in the busy mind. I'm present. Mm-hmm. The call goes out. The gathering is happening. And what that means is the figures that I'm familiar with and the figures that I'm not so familiar with begin to gather. These are not ego figures or personifications of different people that I know necessarily. These are figures that are presenting themselves, in the spontaneity of the imagining experience. Then what happens is I follow. Now this is many of us know this at this point in our life development. I don't lead at all. I follow. I have to bring patience and presence. And I wait and I listen and I follow. Forever there's 2 or 3 figures that are familiar. There's a figure that is, quote, a guide-like figure. One is an image has a human expression. Another has an animal expression. These are guides that have been present, right? And then there are other figures that I meet along the way, like we would in a novel or a book or a piece of music, right? Those figures that come forward and present themselves, here we are. Here we are. Quickly, I goes to we, of course. We are all familiar with that. In story and myth, I does go to we, and we're in the company of the others. Now I settle down and I engage, and I am now into the journeying of imagination. Now, something really incredible happens, because I'm not in my rational mind anymore. I'm in spontaneity. Yes, it's like creative writing. Yes. It is like poetry that moves through us. Yes, of course. When I'm blessed to be working with Dennis and he tutors me and guides me through a poetic response, yes, it has a felt sense like that. And more is happening because the psyche is becoming foreground. I, for sure, and the rest of us are part of what is presenting, right? I'm in that matrix of imagination. And while doing that, I noticed a couple of things. One is that there are different quadrants. So I call those the 4 quadrants of the imagination matrix. Nothing new, really. One quadrant is earth, another quadrant is mind, another quadrant is machine, another quadrant is universe. I lay it all out in the book with great elaboration and story and all kinds of things. And I give them those particular definitions because actually they all dissipate as a definition. And it is an interactive field for sure, interrelated, interactive, but it's important because there are things that have to do with earth that go to the regenerativity of earth and soil, right? We know that. We know the rhizome level and dimension of psyche and consciousness. And certainly with mind, those of us here, more familiar than almost anybody where I'm talking about this kind of thing, we know mind, we know the figures of imagination, right? Those figures of the natural mind are really, really important. And they participate in the mosaic, in the web of experience that is the imagination matrix. And machine left out most of the time, but in the world of today, so important. It has everything to do with functionality in terms of how our body works, machine, to what about the avatars, online identities, everything that's moving forward through the technology of the day. Important. They are present as well. And when we get into the panel discussion, we can open that up. How now? I'm asked in so many places to come forward and work with kids and in families with, cyber addiction and isolation and despair, and on it goes. So there's a whole way of doing that, working through and along with imagination. And then universe, the transcendent quality. And each of us has our own expression. It can be everything from that which we name, big quotes, spiritual, to that which is transcendent, to that which is universal. It's important, though, because in the application of this work, to remember those 4 quadrants really matters when I'm working with illness, disease syndromes, when I'm working with emotional distress, when I'm working with states of experience that are quite severe. To host imagination, to remember those 4 quadrants and how they interrelate, and what happens at what I call the confluence, the intersection of those different elements, something quite extraordinary happens. There's a healing response that comes forward. And I'll give examples. These soul companions, these are so important. I want to do 2 things. I want to do soul companions. I want to talk just a bit about something that was a discovery that was really important. And the soul companions are the figures that I am going to be journeying with. So there's a way of working with those companions. One way is to illuminate certain supportive figures, because when we journey into these realms, like any journey, it requires that there's some figures that have a supportive presence, not of me personally, the one that looks like me, but supportive of the troop, of the group that's journeying, right? And then there are other figures that are in our lives that are difficult. They're shadow-like figures. And there's the need to transmute those figures, right? Because in the world of imagination, in the journeying through deep imagination, those can be some of the most important. Yes, we know the supportive ones. We all know the stories that talk about the supportive figures that guide the way, that lead, that shelter, that support, that protect. It's the others that become so important, right? The critic in Awake Life, or the judge, that one, how important that one becomes. When we go through the process of transmutation, which I describe fully in the book, we can talk about, if it comes up a panel, how to move these figures or facilitate their evolution from the difficult and the really threatening into something that's generative. They bring capacities when we're journeying in the realms of the deep imagination that are so vital and important. They bring the capacities. As we know in story and myth, they bring the capacities that are so helpful. 2 of my favorite for me personally, right? Feeling left out, rejected. I was a little boy. When I was growing up, I was the smallest in the class. Oh my goodness, I'm just hearing all the coyotes right outside my window right now. They're just in a big harmony at the moment. I was really little. So feeling left out was a big deal. But even like sports came, are you kidding? I mean, think when they started selecting teams and you're the littlest. I was fast, but that was kind of for protection as well, to get away from the bullies. Or then think when young women came, girls. All right, so left out was a complex that kind of continued. Well, left out in the awake world still gets me. I still feel like sometimes, I'm not part of everybody else's gig, right? And I feel kind of bad. In the world, behind the world, between the worlds, in the underworlds of the deep imagination, in the imagination matrix, left out is extraordinary, because left out has talent, right? In its shadow form, it's threatening and scary and energy depleting, of course. In journeying in the realms of deep imagination, left out has a keen eye and a deep resource. And it's very helpful to be part of left out, right? Outlaw too, right on the fringes, edges. That one is so cool. When you're journeying deep imagination, you're with the troop and outlaw shows up. It's the one that says, what the heck? Let's go. Forget it. You're stalling. It it has a role to play, as they all do. And at this point in time, just to give you a quick peek, at this point in time, when I'm journeying in the morning in imagination, there are about, I would say, 8 to 10 each day, sometimes 12 or 14 that show up. The call goes out, the gathering is beginning, it's happening, and there are these figures. And then we journey and we follow. We all follow the guidance of some of the lead figures, right? And amazing where we land and what happens, the inspiration, the creativity that comes forward, right? I'm working with a problem. I'm working now with a really significant problem, which is why I called on James and Marion. And when they come and I bring that into this imaginal experience, this journey, wow, the perspective, the resource, the different ideation, the intelligence, and that's where I want to go to, and then I'll pause. The imagination and the intelligence, what I'm naming imaginal intelligence. And I take that from the 4 quadrants, so I call it IQ4, imaginal intelligence. Drawing on each of the quadrants, we know about intellectual intelligence, IQ, we know about emotional intelligence, and we are familiar now with embodied intelligence, all incredibly important with significant roles to play. But imaginal intelligence? Whoa, really? Is it possible to actually increase imaginal intelligence? Well, I'm suggesting to you that when we're in this journey, in this dig, or whatever it is for you, imaginal intelligence increases. So, thinking that might be so, we decided to take it to the Academy of Imagination, or I did, and do some research. Was it really possible? And now we know, because we have the equipment. The neuroscience is so front and center in so many ways now, right? With this work, that we do know that there are ways of measuring, because it's around plasticity, right? We know that the mind begins to shift as we go through different stages of our life. And neuroplasticity begins to wane just a bit, goes in and out in certain ways, right? But we also know that with too much rational thinking and kind of fixed screen time, when we're in that mode, there is a stagnation that begins to happen in life. We also know, though, that with creativity and so on, there's a plasticity that happens, an opening that happens. And the idea is, I'm working with Divergence, which is just a company that's offering technology that measures. It's, nothing really new. It's off the shelf. You put on this crown kind of thing, and it just measures brainwaves. Nothing out of the ordinary with that. The idea, though, and it's now many therapists are working with this, because the key is meditation, right? If you can quiet the mind, you move from alpha, which is kind of a more assertive, more active mental state. And the idea is to get to a theta state. I'm really simplifying for time, but just you get to a theta experience. And they know when theta increases in brainwave activity, innovation, creativity happens, and there's a sense of well-being that comes forward. Okay, all to the good. So I got involved with this group, and I said, I'm experiencing the very same thing, but not with a quiet meditative mind, but with the very active imaginal mind. When I'm following the others in the process of the dig, something happens. As I said, things come forward that were not necessarily. My body relaxes. I am part of something and a rhythm. I call it skeletal resonance that is really extraordinary. So the guy says to me, when I'm with a couple other people now, and I'm advancing this idea. And he says, no, I don't think so. We're going to do the meditation. Let me show how it works. I'll pause in just a moment. And, he has the screen. And when you go into theta, you see a little bit of imagery come on the screen and colors and so on and so forth. You're listening on a headset to music. Usually is how people will do it, or some calming meditation in one sort of the next. I said, well, what I'd like to experiment with is something a little different. I'd like to put this crown on, right? And then what I'd like to do is to close my eyes, but go into a different state of awareness, a different state of consciousness, what I'm calling the journeying in the realms of deep imagination. For me, the dig. and meet my soul companions and get really engaged and active and be part of an unfolding process of discovery. They said, oh, Steve, I don't think so. But hey, game on, let's do it. Put on the crown. And you can't imagine what happened. It spiked. It started slow, and then I got into the dig and I started following the others. The I, meaning that I brought my presence to the companions, and we were journeying. And sure enough, theta went, and they were watching it on the screen as we'd never seen anything like this happen. This whole gasp, and all these professionals came over and started looking. We wired up 2 other people, and what's happening really, truly, is that we're in a different quality of consciousness. And imaginal intelligence, if we want to call it that, increases. Well, we think, I'm at Pacifica, so we have a lot of professors, research people, and so on and so forth. So I thought, well, all right, there's a quantitative, verification. Let's do something qualitative. So we have a really esteemed professor, and she develops 129 questionnaire, of how to measure different states of consciousness and qualities. And then, short answers, and does this whole extensive research project for the people that have been working with me, working on this process of journeying in the realms of deep imagination, journeying in the imagination matrix. And sure enough, the qualitative and the quantitative research was absolutely conclusive that we're in those realms of experience. Something different does happen. Our bodies relax, creativity opens, right? How we are in relation to ourselves and others, our well-being, our health. It's a huge phenomenon, a different shift, right? And again, I have so many illustrations that we can talk about and examples of how that works. Right. I'm going to end with this idea of what it is to live an imagination-centered life. In part, I'm preaching to the choir because most of you, if not every single one of you, is living an imagination-centered life. And I'm looking forward to partnering with a couple of you that I'm in conversation with to really open this up and explore the realms of the deep imagination through a variety of different mediums. At the end of the day, what is the imagination matrix? At the end, the last chapter, after doing this work for 3 years, it is a story web, as we know. It is a story web where all the creatures, things, landscapes, activities of the deep imagination present in stories, and each and every has a story to share, to tell. It's as old as the traditions, and it's as new as the becoming, right? A story to tell. And once we're inside the range and the realm of deep imagination, the stories are presenting themselves on their own behalf. We're not making them up, and we're not being commodified or orchestrated by a social media or another set of imperatives. Okay, I'll leave it there. And I really do invite, thank you, Dana. Invite the panel to let's engage.
Thank you for that, Steve. That was amazing. And I want to get us to the panel. Let me turn it over to a couple of our new guests. I'd love to hear from Bree or Myka first, if you'd like to share some of your thoughts about the presentation.
For me, it was particularly interesting tonight because I learned about the dig a while back, and very much in a student-centered place. And I haven't really been in touch with the explanation of it and the more kind of, back end of it, I guess, so much as I have in my personal practice. And it's such a simple but rich and deep way to get into the deep work. And my specialty is working with teenagers. And for when I introduce the dig to them, I accompany them. And we work through the dig together to make sure that they kind of stay on the safe side of the street. And they love it. And I think that there's just such beauty in the simplicity of the instruction and the guidance, taking you into such a deep, potent, imaginal place. I just will never get over that.
Yeah. Well, I taught junior high and middle school for the first part of my life. I am in love with working with teens. And now, like, as you know, as much as all of us, how important it is now to keep imagination alive, given the bombardment of so much screen time and what happens. We can go into that more, but yeah, it's really a great way to navigate.
Definitely.
I'm going to jump in and just echo Myka's sentiments of listening to Steve talk. I am in a very fortunate position to kind of play on your words, Will, of preacher stands, to witness Steve practice what he preaches and to see that at the forefront of his praxis on a daily basis, of hearing he was in his dig in the morning, or, he's going to go work an issue out, and to come back with some clarity on that. It's really great instruction for him to tell us, let's go to our own corners and go through our own process, and then meet again in the morning and have those conversations. And during my time with dream tending, I've been able to identify some of those soul companions that Steve mentioned, and the Earth quadrant is very abundant for me. And Steve, I'm so captured by these 4 quadrants and the mixing up of the machine and the introduction of the machine. And I don't believe that I'm alone in this, but I do think there's a sense of fear as we introduce the machine and imagination. And I think as I'm still reading through the book and learning from you, that's the part that really I stumble on and have a little fear about, is how do imagination and the machine work together for good? And how do we turn that into an ally, especially in the day and age that we're in? And as Myka mentioned, working with teens.
Yeah. Well, one of the fears in the world of today is the takeover of the machine, which is, part of the story of Frankenstein again and again and again, that whole thing, right? But that's not, we can't just push it away. That's not going to happen. I don't know where I'd be without my GPS, quite frankly. I don't think I could navigate. So it's not that. It's something else. But I'll tell you where let me share another story. Dana, you invited stories, so I was with my wife and I were with our grandchildren just about, 5 months ago now. And we were going in, when we come over, they love to see us. They just love to see us. They particularly like to see me mostly because I bribe them. So I always bring something sweet over, but they do say. But then I also share stories and read with them and all kinds of stuff. So like many of us, with little ones. But we got over and then we noticed there's quiet, absolute quiet. And we go, what? Where did they go? They disappeared, right? And of course, you can extrapolate. Right? Where did they go? They went in the other room, the big screen. Each of them had their own screens, actually, and they were watching, games and stories and this and that and the other thing, and they were just gone. All right, so we looked at each other. My wife had the idea, I have to credit her. She said, this is not cool. They're isolating. They're coming down on their mood. I mean, they're wide awake because, there's nothing at all wrong with the amazing, electrifying, animating, illuminated visuals that come forward that people are so unbelievably talented in bringing, that are interactive and related, but not these games. These were just like flat screen things. They're just like, ugh, take some work like what Will's doing, and it's like a way different gig, right? It's a kind of apples and oranges. It's the next evolution of human consciousness, in my humble opinion. So they were in the other room just deadened, right? And my wife said, look, let's try something. I go, anything. Jeez. So she invites them to come out, and she said, what are you? And so one says, well, I was watching Spider-Man, he was watching, and the little one was the little girl. He was 5.5. The little girl is 4.5, and she was watching some version of Wonder Woman. And they had costumes because it was all preparation for Halloween, and so it was just a number of months ago, Halloween, the whole thing, right? And she said, why don't you put your costumes on. So they went and put their costumes on. Each of them now, the avatars, the identities they're watching online, they were embodying, and they came back. And then we pushed all the furniture to either side, and everybody got into the enactment. Now we were engaged in acting and really energetically involved. So any version, 10 versions of that has to happen. When I'm with families now and the parents are losing their kids, you all may know, listening to the fear and the paralysis that is alive in parents when they lose their children to something that's going on online so many hours of the day without friendships outside, just isolated. It is horrible to listen to the pathos and the pain. And what do? So in the book, I talk about how you have to invite the avatars or the identities into the family system. You do. They need to be a participant. They're there anyway. They're there, right? You ask a young one, like a therapist, like we have to train our counselors this way. You ask a kid, hey, the standard question, what brings you here, in therapy or in counseling? And the kid looks at you, young person, with a blank stare. Why are they looking at you with a blank stare? Because something's wrong in their life? No, not really. Because you asked a weird question. What brings you here? They don't know what you're talking about. What brings you here? Me? Or this online identity, or this avatar, or this. You see what I'm saying? It's a different world, and we need to invite the others that are figures of both the screen time and the imaginal time into the family conversation. The table has to be set, and others need to be invited in. And there's ways of doing that, yes, they do work. It's not just fanciful. I've worked it. My daughter, who's a expert at this and goes all over the country and other countries and works and teaches the way of doing this, it is possible to invite those into the family conversation in different ways. Okay.
That's really cool. Kayleen, yeah, please come in.
Yeah. Steve, as you were talking, it reminded me of when I've taught Jung in the Red Book seminars before. And I was teaching about the shadow. We actually had shadow parties where everybody was invited to come in costume, dressed as a figure that they identified as a shadow. And we stayed in costume for 2 hours, writing and journaling and just having a cocktail party. We had a tea party with scones, and, you had to be what your figure was. And we were identifying it in the way of who gave us the biggest negative charge as a way of encountering that. And so we had Kim Kardashian, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton at one 4 years ago. And it was 6 years ago. And it was just amazing, the wisdom that then came out. And that was, I thought your point about how do we transmute was so, so, so critical, that there is wisdom in those shadow figures. And if we just banish them, then we're at their mercy. But if we invite them to the table in the conversation, and when you do this with group work, to invite what you're calling the avatars or the characters in, there's so much richness that the parents can mine or that we can mine from each other. Mm-hmm. So I love that. And I just have to say, I've always been impressed by your playful spirit. And I saw that shining through today. You can sense that you have delight. And going back to what you first said about the tent of wisdom, that's such a powerful metaphor. I just started to draw it, who is going to come to your tent of wisdom, and who are the strange angels that are going to appear, and can you have the hospitality to invite them to the feast, and then they will bless you. So I think that's what you're doing with this work is that. And I'd love to ask a question later after other people have a chance to talk, but you've stimulated a lot of thoughts in my mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what opens up at the end of the day is wonder, doesn't it? Wonder. That's the amazing thing about being in imagination. Oh, thank you. That was beautiful what you shared.
Speaking of wonder, that's one of the big connections with that work that you mentioned, and thank you for saying such kind words about the psychedelic mixtapes, and fascinated by everything, and wonders it. And one of the things, first of all, Kayleen, I'm impressed because I'm not sure my shadow is well behaved enough for a tea party, But
A cocktail party then.
Cocktail party, yeah, that sounds more likely. But yeah, I think what you're saying about bringing the imagination into the space, it takes me into what I wanted to ask you about around shared imagination and shared space, which is a big part of what our project is about getting people into a shared state of imagination where we're all in as close as we can all be in that energy together, in that framework together. And you talk about bringing those figures into the dining room, and you end up sharing imagination in each of these different ways. And I wonder if you could speak about the profoundness of sharing imagination. And it's almost in some ways feels like the most precious thing that you can ever do with people is sharing their imaginations. It's almost like sharing in soul. But I wonder if you could speak about the sharing of this state.
Yeah, I just love what you said at the end. It is one of the most precious things that can happen. Hey, what is the world asking of us today? It ain't working the way it's going, right? So there's the necessity, I think, or the yearning for a different way of being in connection and in community with one another. And we think of community as out here, but community is as much inside the inner community of soul companions as it is outside with our community of people that are like-minded, like we all are gathered here this time. But to develop these relationships with these figures, with these soul companions, and then to invite others to be part of that extended field of imagination, oh my goodness, something different happens, right? And of course, you know that in your work, Will, and we certainly do in the work that we're doing with all the workshops. We're in these communities where imagination is coming forward. And people are listening and touching and feeling the figures as they present themselves on their own behalf, and they're in the room along with us. Yeah. When we open imaginal intelligence, or whatever name each of us is going to use to identify that, when imagination opens, wonder is present, right? There's something that happens that's very somatic as well as everything else, right? There's that kind of resonance that moves through our body, and we are connected in a field that is very different then. Oh my gosh, it is so good, When that, I guess I just say one last, when I'm in touch personally, when I visit in the morning, these figures, these soul companions, I do feel a sense of deep belonging. I'm not the leader. I'm part of a community, and I have a sense of belonging, deep belonging, and a real true sense of coming home to something different. And I can tell you, I was just, I had two experiences. I'm not going to name names. I've been on, there's two different boards that I've been invited to be part of different organizations. Okay. And I was at one board, and they started like we started, a poem. They started that way. They evoked imagination from the beginning. We were in story from the get-go, and we were invited to share a story. Hey, what brings you here this day? Can you start with just once upon a time and just share what brings you into this place, just to evoke imagination? When I work with CEOs of major corporations, I'm asked to work with CEOs and their leadership teams. I never start with content, right? Always start with evoking the imaginal in the room. Something completely different happens. We're part of a collective and shared experience.
I also want to just mention that I've watched you and your work for probably 25 years now. And I've watched you work one-on-one with individuals both in Santa Barbara. And the one that I remember so keenly is the time that I watched you in action at Aeronos.
Yeah.
In the room where all the heavyweights had been meeting for 30 some years. And this is a deepening of all of that work, and I can sense it. So I don't want to sound conceptual here, but here's where you took me. I've always been curious about Joseph Campbell, who repeats what I'm going to say now. I think The Power of Myth is the first place that he, with Moyers, that he said it, but then it appears in other works of his. Here's what he says: myths are expressions of the energies of the organs of the body, either in conflict with each other or in complement with one another. that for him was the origin of myths. So biology is mythology, I think, for him. And I'm beginning to think that that's also true for you. Here's my question to you, and it's purely playful, and I'm curious about it. Is there a possibility that these energies can coalesce into figures, like the figures that companion you and that you've been speaking about for the last hour? And is it possible further that these energies can actually metamorphose into stories, into narratives? And the reason this idea intrigues me, and I think your work is in this field, is that stories begin in the energies of the body. So any response from you, I'd love to hear. I think we all would.
Well, Dennis, yeah, for me, after the, I guess 2.5, 3 years of working with this book, that's where it ended, in the story web. And the origination forever is in the organicity of body, right? Of Earth's body. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Imaginal body, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it comes from body, I think, for sure. And it's so important for a variety of reasons, for the reasons that we know, because new teachings and new guidance comes from these emerging stories that we're so in need of at the moment, frankly. And to build community around emerging stories like what we're doing here, that's sacred. That's not, I don't want to say sacred. It's just exceptional and important, and it's not inflated nor deflated. It's just so, but it's so necessary, I think, to be in the world of today.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of people that have that are suffering from illness. It's from A through Z, right? I was just working with a woman with irritable bowel syndrome, and it's hard, with the anxiety that generates.
Yeah.
It's crippling, it's isolating. Like, I'm scared to go and travel because of, and you just go through that. And she was trying everything, great physicians, great this, that, and the other, a lot of healthcare providers, but nothing was working. She came to one of our workshops, right? And we worked with body and with imagination and drew little bits of the 4 quadrants and created imaginal medicine. Really, truly came from dream and a story that emerged. And, from earth came the generative quality of soil, right? The generative earth, right? From mind came a figure that was a wounded healer figure that we all are familiar with. From the functionality came something else. And from the universal, the whole intention that comes forward, the positive intention, that transcendent quality. You can put those, you mix them all together. And there's an imaginal medicine that's possible. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And I wouldn't say this if it were not accurate. 3 weeks later, because, you not only create the imaginal medicine from these components, and I'm just really simplifying, so it's much more complex, but it's all written about in the book. Then you need, dosage and application, so every day when the pharmaceuticals are coming in, you take a little bit of the imaginal medicine. That's a good thing to do, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's complementary medicine. It's not, anything different than that. But that homeopathic complementary medicine can be so, so powerful. And those stories are so important because they emerge from the body itself, the breath, the organs, the blood, the pulse, the rhythm.
It has a very shamanic feel to me as you spoke, and really dipping back into ancient wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Yeah, I have to say I've been blessed to work with people in different cultures that, I'm just like a beginner, but in that journeying through deep imagination in the morning, Aboriginal elder is always present. And I had always present. And I had the blessing of being in Northern Territories and spending some time. And, I don't want to inflate because that would be wrong, but they offered me something because I was able to go to Arnhem Land, which is a sacred place of Aboriginal peoples, and experience something quite extraordinary. So, and then they said, "Oh, Arnhem Land, Steve, you take this story, take this story, take this story, tell others," and, I have to really say, because it's cultural appropriation to get too big on that. So just a little microdose, let's say, that I was afforded with privilege. But wow, to have those figures on journey through the realms of deep imagination, in the matrix of imagination. Aboriginal elders, so wonderful. Arnhem Land Steve, it's great because I'm not an ego anymore. I'm just like, oh, that one, that quality of shamanic presence, that one. Yeah. That's when wonder awakens, right? Yeah.
I'd love to share my perspective just as a personal journeyer here. I went to Pacifica 20 some odd years ago, and I really wanted to get the whole Hillman thing. Like, I would read Hillman and I would leave my body. But I really wanted to get it. And I've been a seeker my whole life and everything. And then about 5 years ago, I took the weekend thing and watched the collective imagination open up in the space in such a powerful way that I knew it. I always trusted that was a thing. And I'd had a lot of synchronicity in my life and all of that kind of stuff. But so something really opened up in me. And what I wanted to talk about was a little bit what Will asked about earlier, which was like this collective thing that happens in the space and then carries on when you leave the space. And I'm part of dream tending for 5 years, was around when the dig started being talked about and all of that, and part of Myka's cohort and part of the Academy of Mentors. But one thing that would happen, and I'm going to talk about two things really quick, the collective part, which is a lot of us sit and draw while dreams are being tended. That's kind of how we manage that. And today, even the first thing I did when I knew I was coming to this panel was I got my sheet out and I drew these 3 figures. I don't know what they are. I offer them to the space. Someone may need them right now. I don't know what they mean to me. But I say that because I'd say at least 4 or 5 times during our retreats when Steve is tending someone and we are drawing, someone in the space will have drawn the figure or the object before it is brought into the space through the dream. And it's happened to me twice where I've drawn the thing and then it gets revealed in the dream, and I'm sitting there with the pyramid on my page going, excuse me, I drew a pyramid about 20 minutes ago and I just need to show you. So, and I have to say, I'm a seeker and all that, but I'm a rational woman. I love my rational linear mind. I was born into a family of rational, mostly people. And I can't tell you how amazing it's been for me to be able to enter this space and to find my way into it personally. And that's just what I want to offer here, that for everyone listening who's been through this or is having trouble with the dig or still knocking on the door of it, just trust yourself. And Steve and I connected. I don't know what it was. It was some dream. He connected. He's done a bunch of dreams for me, but one word that really came up that was super powerful for about 2 years in our space was the word longing. Mm. And longing is my portal into the deep imagination. Mm. That when I can connect to my longing and connect to dream, I just dive immediately. And so there's something, I think, in the heart of each of us that I don't know if it's longing for you or not, but I just want to invite you to just keep pushing aside your ideas, your big ideas and your concepts, and just keep falling into the images. And because I always felt on the outside looking in with this work. And there's something about, I think this work is ultimately about trusting, just trusting. And so I just wanted to offer that into this space today, that I'm a recovering rational, that I've always wanted to be into this stuff. And one of the funny things that Myka and some friends of ours that I came up with, because I so wanted to go all in with this, was I announced one night, I think it was our first year in dream tending, we were staying in a Airbnb, and I looked at Myka and our friend Julie, and I said, you know what? I am no longer going to be surprised when a synchronicity shows up. I am just going to now say, right on time. And that's what this work has given to me, is to just accept that this deep imagination work I do, and these figures I hang out with, and these journeys I go on, are just as real as the pencil in my hand, and even more potent in my life, and more concrete in some ways for me.
Speaking of synchronicity, Joel Sloan has written into the chat box. Can you speak about the place or experience of synchronicity, where your imagination merges or crosses over and connects with real people and life experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's, let me start with the familiar and then go to the unfamiliar for me. Synchronicity happens, right? And, we imagine that as, whoa, I encounter something, and it's synchronous because I was either thinking about that at the same time it happened, or, a dream is happening, and then I experience something in the world that is synchronous to the dream that happened a night before or 2 nights later. I mean, everybody has different versions of the experience that we name synchronicity, but there's an intersection that happens, an intersection between realms of experience, right? And the one idea that is very popular around that is that when synchronicity does happen, woohoo, that is a portal of some sort, and you are in touch with, at that moment in time, something about your fate. What is calling now? So let me just give a personal example before I move forward. When synchronicities happen for me in any of the ways I named, plus 3 or 4 others, I really pause. I do. I now take, like, I think, Kelly, what you're sharing. Whoop. Whoop. Okay, now pause. What's happening here? I'm in a matrix of a different dimension. I'm in a different place. I'm in the imaginal realms that we're giving name today. Something different happened. The portal is open, and I really pause and listen. So the most important thing for me is a witnessing presence, listening differently, modes of perception shift, and I get curious. That's the key, always. At that moment, getting curious. What's unfolding here? What is gathering around a sense of intentionality or purposefulness that may not be rooted in expectations of others or a programmed design, but something else that's moving through a different kind of force, life force that is unfolding.
That's something I wanted to ask you about exactly there. The last thing you said, life force, because that's where the word synchronicity has begun to reach its limits for me. And, we think of synchronicity, it almost still feels a little bit dead matter, like, whoa, this random chance thing happened. And we tell this story of the beetle, right? That's the famous story, the beetle that comes in from the woman's dream and shows up. And then Jung says, here's your beetle, and here's the synchronicity. But never in that story do we stop to recognize that beetle is alive.
Yeah.
That beetle has an imagination too, and that the relationship between that imagination and that beetle might, and the person's imagination might actually be interesting in that moment. And so what I wonder, for me, it's, I'm just was moved by what you guys were just saying about the organs. And that's what I wanted to come in on, is that we are coming out of a paradigm that sees body and matter as dead. And so to begin to start suggesting that body and this stuff is actually a source of imagination is pretty radical, actually. It's like really radical. And it goes that direction that I've been wanting to go, that I've been wanting to break beyond synchronicity and to get into life, life and imagination beyond just the synchronistic. And I wonder how you feel about that, especially since you landed on that place of life force.
Well, I think, right, it's, for 10 years, I've traveled to Burning Man, and I'm always traveling with the same, I meet a lot of people because I hang out with a lot of folks there, but it's Robbie Bosnack, so some of you know the name, but he talks a lot about embodied imagination, the imagination of body, the life force, the move through. Yeah, I think for me, well, what happens is it's so vital. There's something that is moving through that has a life of its own making, and it's not dead matter, because when we do, like that analogy that you just named, when that beetle or that cockroach or that elephant or that whatever, it becomes just a thing that then correlates with this thing, and then we have an explanatory principle, right? Or we make an analogy too, which is a little better, but still it's an explanation or an interpretation or an analysis. And that's way different than having a lived, embodied experience conjoined with the presence of the other, and then to participate in the process of co-journeying. So here's what I do. I mean, this is truly what I do. What I do in the morning is when things like that happen, I extend an invitation. And guess who becomes a co-journeyer in the dig, right? And when that happens, now we are journeying together in the realms of a living imaginal field, in a matrix of imagination, in that tapestry. And when that happens, whoa, there's life that comes forward between the two of us, and the conversation that evolves is not prescribed. It's not explained. It is an evolving actuality of a life force of a different making. That's how I'd share that.
That's amazing. Thank you. And in that experience, there's a withness. And that withness is like the most, you talked about longing, you talked about, feeling left out. That as long as you keep that object, this symbolic object attitude going, there's no withness. And the withness is maybe one of the most healing experiences you could possibly have.
Yeah. We all know witness because witness is part of a legal paradigm, witness, right? We know witness because we are witnessed or being watched by something. We all know that in the realms, in the worlds behind the worlds, below the worlds, between the worlds, and the realms of deep imagination, witness becomes a presence and a witnessing presence. Whoa, to journey with witnessing presence, huge.
Might be a bit of a subject change, but I wanted to bring it back to the transmutation that you had talked about at the beginning, or as a part of your talk, and the transmutation of what we perceive as shadow figures. And I think that this is true for teenagers in particular, that's my population, but really for anybody, about the idea that so many of the shadow figures for teenagers, as I was reading in the book, the examples that you gave, and you said a few tonight, the inner critic, the martyr, those are real live people externally in teenagers' lives, in all of our lives. And so it was a kind of a paradigm shift for me. I'm used to thinking of everything as being more imaginal and internal. And then when I was looking at these shadow figures, I thought, well, I can name these figures, these shadow figures in the lives of my teenagers. And the idea of helping them transmute these imaginal figures, which I have a really great, Bree reminded me to tell the story if there's time, but to transmute, say, a dream image or a figure, a soul companion, versus working with those around you whom you cannot transmute. I just wanted to throw that into the space to see what people thought.
Well, for me, it's one of the most important things that I am privileged to offer, particularly people that are threatened. Because, the figures that you're naming are sometimes figures in the home place or in the friendship group, bully,
Teachers.
Teachers that are abusive. And, it's aggressive, it's abusive, it's invasive. They are really, really tough for kids, They're tough for all of us. But when you're in that vulnerable place of being a teen or younger, it's really, really hard. Or, the college years as well. What I like to do is first, my responsibility is to protect who I'm with. I have to go there because of my background and training and commitment. So I have to I have to ask some questions and make sure that there's nothing is happening that is threatening or dangerous. But once that's established, it's kind of a different kind of work. It's a little more social work oriented. But after that, something else is necessary. So I personify. I have that person, draw the person, name the person. Well, I'll just use a name. This is Rex. Okay, I'll just begin. Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is Rex. So I have the person describe the person and then even give a bunch of adjectives as to what's the character traits that's so scary, frightening, threatening, or invasive. Right? Okay, now I have a personified person. I have the figure, and now I have the person. Before any of that happens, I have to make absolutely sure that that person I'm working with has support and protection, not just physically, but psychologically and emotionally. So I summon the soul companions that are supportive companions, support and protection. Who are the people that are figures in your awake life and even, in your inner life, even though I try not to use words that are alien at that point, but who are figures that you feel particularly protected by, safe with, that are supportive of you, the support figures. So first I get them present with us. So I'm working with somebody, they're present here and now, along with us, sense of protection. And now the one that's the bully, let's say, or the one that's the threatening one. Who is the person? What are their characteristics? And then I want to move that from the actuality of this physical person into an imaginal presence. Okay? Because I'm scared of this person. I ain't going to get close to this person. I'm either running away from this person, or I'm bottled up inside and repressed, or I'm so agitated that I've stopped eating and I'm going into eating disorders, or I'm so agitated that I'm not sleeping at night and I'm in an anxiety state, or I get so despondent and isolated, on and on it goes. So you have to support, identify the characteristics. Then I imagine that person in the room along with us, but with support as an imaginal figure. And then we do some things that I talk about in traveling in the matrix of imagination. We have to get curious. Who is here now? Right? Who is this bully? If we can begin to see through different lenses, different perceptions, we can see through this figure to who this figure is and can be. Now, the reason that's important is because I'm moving out of fear of that person, which means it's got me. He, she, it, they've got me. Identification into relationship. So it's outside of me now. Good. And now into revelation, where I can see who this figure could be, right? And then I can have the beginnings of a dialogue and an ongoing dialogue. Now, why is that important? Because if I can have a dialogue with that person as an imaginal figure in the room, right? I have a soul companion. Believe it or not, I have a soul companion that is, an imaginal representation of this one that's so difficult and threatening. Why is that important? Because predators forever have psychic radar, and they will find people that are defenseless and vulnerable. Really good to cultivate a relationship with this one in an imaginal way, an ongoing relationship. And then the ones that are so predatory with that kind of psychic radar, they know that one's there. They tend to stay away a little bit. In time, now I'm talking not days and months, but in time, over the months, 2 years or so, you deepen the relationship with this one, right? You do. And you begin to see what's possible, what are some of the energetics that are alive, that are generative rather than destructive. But it takes time, and it's, it needs to be very, very mindful. But the stories Joe Campbell talks about, so many talk about. The one that I always work with adults is the classic Darth Vader, right? You got to get your support people. You got to have Yoda around. You got to have Obi-Wan. You got to have all that set up. But this one is the death of the universe. This one, you don't get worse than this, right? That's how it was portrayed. But then, when you began, you look beneath the mask, under the mask, see through the persona, and you see something that is becoming amazingly important for Luke and his journey forward in that particular story. You see something that is of value. He becomes actually, the father figure that even helps in the next evolution of his experience. Really important, this work, though, because it's everywhere now. And my God, it is everywhere now. And it's playing itself out so fully in so many arenas, as we know.
I'll jump in. Well, first of all, it's nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Dana and Will. And it's just an honor to support your wonderful book, Steve. I haven't finished reading it, but I'm excited that you've already been sharing with us about the different companions, because I have one that I really want to highlight. And with that, I want to thank Kelly for opening up the opportunity in resonance to belonging. So I'll share a personal story with my experience with the shadow companion. Of all the companions, I never thought it would actually be that one to really bring me to a sense of belonging. And this actually took me back a few years ago when I was, Steve, doing the working on the certificate for dream tending with you at Pacifica. And here we are. It was a weekend of nightmares. That was the focus for that weekend. And it was my very first time ever witnessing what I did. I remember I was really scared. I didn't even want to go there. And it really took some time for me to actually be present with my partner. And I remember you shared with us, Steve, during that weekend, that every image in our dreams, including our nightmares, is an aspect of ourselves, and the importance to be able to face our shadow. So like when they come through in dreams, whether that's a vampire or a dragon or a zombie, like how there's always like a gift in itself, and how is that supporting us? I feel like I'm understanding of that intellectually now. And when I was reading your book, it was a wonderful reminder when you talk about how you noted that to be able to know our own shadow actually helps us to be able to deal with other people's shadows and to be able to be for other people in that way. So what I mean by how that helped me with belonging is that I started to notice that once I started to create a relationship with my shadow companion, it actually allowed me to, instead of judging other people's darkness, to be able to, deal with it, or better yet, to be able to hold space, to be able to be. And in that process, the sense of belonging comes from feeling a lot more connected to others versus what I would experience before, which was this disconnect. So for me, it's been just really fascinating to experience my journey around the one companion that I would run away from. And it's always very often for many to run away from that one versus the others that you talk about in your book. It actually happened to be, at least for me in my experience, the one that brought me to a sense of belonging and connection to others. So I just wanted to share that. And I also kind of wanted to invite in, as we're kind of bringing in imagery, this was my nightmare, the clay mask that I that I created on that day. So this is actually the first time that I get to introduce it. And so I was reminded too that you shared to really shed light to the mask, not just, it's not just an art project, but to place it somewhere like a sacred sanctuary. So it's been 3 years now, and it's in my sacred sanctuary, and it supports me on the daily because I get to see it on the daily as far as when I have a nightmare, because I am a spiritual being having a human experience. It's going to happen. I'm going to have a nightmare. I'm going to freak out. There's been times since I've had nightmares and I wake up sweating. But when I see it, I am taken back to that time, that weekend, and reminding myself that I'm okay and that there's a gift in itself, and just to kind of be with that energy. So with all that being said, I have a question in resonance to, so we're talking about all this and it's great, but for those that are tuned in, how can they support themselves when it comes to the shadow companion? Like, we can understand it intellectually and we can talk about it. And of course, I'm sharing my personal experience. But what happens in that moment when someone wakes up and regardless of how conscious they are, regardless of how much they've read your book, have done dream tending, but they wake up and they're sweating and they're feeling all the ickiness and they go on their merry day. And it actually does have a trigger. It does have an impact on their day, if not like perhaps even days to go after that. So how can someone like that support themselves when they find themselves in that experience?
Right. And what's true is that more people, well, this was a big study that was done through the International Association Study of Dreams. More people in the world of today are remembering dreams than ever before, right? And they're actually waking up with the remembrance of a dream. And of course, 80% of the dreams that are being remembered are horrific. So they're horrific, nightmarish, intolerable images, very difficult. And exactly what happens, we get gripped, we start sweating, and our whole day is like shaped by, right? And what do? We have to take care of ourselves. So we have a bunch of options. Distraction is a good one. We can distract ourselves away from it. That's good. We can medicalize our way from it. Holy shit. Reach for the medicines, whatever it could be, just take some medicines. Or we could psychologize. That's always helpful for a little bit. It doesn't last for long, but and I shouldn't be betraying my profession, but yeah, it ain't going to go away. We think it's going to go away, but it forever will come back. It does. I mean, for those of us at Pacific, how many times that we heard, I remember James saying, and Marion too, they both, since they're both here now, both say, what are you going to do? They're always going to come back unless we do something different, right? We need to know who's visiting now. What's happening here? What is the dream's desire? Those are very different questions than what does this mean? Why is it happening? What does this have to do with me? That's one paradigm. And we go to that paradigm, we're just going to go around again and again and again and again. Versus who's visiting? Let's replace a given tonight. Who's journeying now? Right? What's happening here? And what is the pull, the life force, the pull of the future, the desire that's being expressed? Way different. We just shifted paradigms. Pragmatically, though, I mean, that's, a different evolution. Pragmatically, I suggest to the person, all right, it's happening. Number one, wake up, just sketch out, just name 3 people in your life that are supportive and or protective. Write those names down, and that's not enough. Do a little doodle, a little sketch, because when you do that, you're in your hands, and now you're in your body a little bit, right? Your substance. So start there, right? Always start there. All right. The nice one is if a person has a pet, like a pet dog, or remembering a child pet that they were, the beloveds that are part of our lives. Really cool to have one of those figures right along with us in this context, right? And a protector, somebody that always I felt safe with. Who's that person in my life that I felt unconditional love, the beloved, right? That one. Maybe it's a grandma, a great aunt, an uncle, grandfather, that one. So first the assemblage needs to happen just to create a safe place. Now sketch the figure. Or even better, if you have Play-Doh, work with a little clay, right? But do something to create its representation of the scary monster figure onto a piece of paper or in a medium some sort. Get it out in front of you. Then, you got to do what you got to do. You have to stand ground. You have to feel your feet on the ground, bring substance to the body, because you got to say a version of what I'm just about to say. It's not okay. It was really not okay for you to mess with me this way. There's a stop that needs to happen. A no. Stop. That in some form or fashion. And it doesn't need to be intellectual. It doesn't need to be psychological. It'd be going into the shower and turning on the cold water. Stop. There's got to be a physiological stop, right? Stop. And then the next step. And this can go very quickly and simply. It doesn't have to be esoteric or overly psychologized, right? And the next step is to draw or sketch the figure And now with this little bit of distance and safety, what's important is to move it into some kind of dialogue. Person shares something with the figure. Here's the key, the trick. Let the figure then offer something back. And the fear that we have is going to roar. It's going to hurt. It's going to injure. It's going to kill or persecute. That's the fear that we have that's going to happen. But if we go through the steps that I just named, when we have the dialogue this way and we listen again, and we listen again, something different begins to happen. And that's when it diffuses. It goes from to shh. And then there's a trick. So I'll just share the trick, a little tool. And that is called particularity. When you have like the mask that you had, when you look with particularity at the dangerous, monstrous figure, that's what kids do all the time. You look really particular. What color is it? What shape is it? How big is it? What's the nature of its eyes? What's about this particular figure that's different than any other figure that is similar, right? It's not just a grizzly bear, or it's just not a horrific monster. It is a particular figure that showed up in this dream. Even if it's a person that we recognize, this person in the here and now, what is particular? And what happens in that little practice is the threat depotentiates, it lessens, and we get to know the person. It eases the immediacy of the threat and the anxiety. So those are kind of practical steps of doing that work. But it's really great, and what we're talking about tonight, whoa, if I go through a process similar to that, like with your mask now, I have a little offering, Vanessa, you know me, I always have an idea, right? Because now we can go to the next evolution, invite this one. Hey, are you available? And you listen. This one says to you, Vanessa, for what? Oh no, now what are you thinking of? This one says, no, I'm just wondering if you're available to allow me to accompany you on journey and see if there's a response. Yes? Then let this one lead and you follow and go into the realms of imagination through the portal that you named and just notice where you two go and what shows up, what presents.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And there's something that came through when you mentioned the word stop, reminded me in terms of like everything that I've learned thanks to the shadow companion. And one of them is discernment. Because when you allow yourself to be in the position of saying, stop, no more, enough is enough, it's like you feel empowered. And that comes from discernment, allowing ourselves to know when to discern, when to say no, when to say yes. So that's been part of my process. And I just wanted to highlight that too, because there's been so many things that I've learned that I've been supported thanks to what I've learned because of Shadow Companion. But thank you for that input.
You're welcome.
Steve, what you were talking about just now just really underscores the link between making an image and developing fluency and facility in the imaginal realms. And once you have the image out there, then something can happen with it, and it reminds me of my favorite quote from the Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is inside of you will save you. And then you can begin to have that dialogue that's so critical to be able to see something out there in its particularity, to shift it. And it just, everything that you're talking about tonight also just resonates with Rilke's lines when he says, that he has this great quote about the future, that you must give birth to your images. They are the future waiting to be born. And fear not the strangeness, because the future must enter you long before it happens. But it comes in the shape of an image. And everything that you've pointed to, from the mask to this dialogue to all of that work, is about the art of cultivating the imagination through image.
Absolutely. It's beautiful. Yes.
On the very point that Vanessa's been bringing up and that Kayleen just articulated, I had something happen to me this morning that I'm going to share, and then it's a question for you, Steve. I'm up between 4 a.m. and 4:15, and I've done it for 33 years. And in the morning, I sit with my journal, a candle lit, and a cup of coffee, and I ask a question. What from yesterday wishes to be remembered? And it takes about 3 seconds, and then it lines up. And I don't care about chronology. I just, as each image or action or situation comes up, I record it. But I also have a dream journal that I keep separate from the recollection. And this morning, for the first time ever, I remembered and recorded 3 dreams from last night. That's never happened in my life. And one reading of that for me is, I think the psyche was preparing me for tonight and for this talk and for our conversation, because these dreams tumbled out of me. But here, and no, I guess maybe it's a creativity question. Here's how I framed it. How much of what I wrote of these dreams is faithful to the dream that I experienced? And how much am I making it up as I record it with as much detail as I can muster? Should I think of the dream then as I remember it, and the dream as I recorded it, as 2 perhaps versions of the same dream? And that's my question. Am I embellishing what I didn't dream, but the psyche is making analogies to what I did dream and I'm recollecting? So it feels like when I write it out, it's a combination of recollecting and imagining kind of happening at the same time. And then the third part of it doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make any difference. Because it's all coming out of that experience, out of the unconscious.
Yeah. Well, just the short answer for me is I know exactly what you're sharing. I think we all do, because you're writing the dream down and then you're, so even I think Freud had a word for that, right? You're in revision right at that point. You're in secondary revision right immediately before you. So for me, I'll just give you, Dennis, what I do is I just write it down. I let go of, but I try to stay faithful, because what I notice is when I'm writing, and I notice then other details come forward, So I give myself lots of permission. Sometimes I'll just go with the feeling to start with, just whatever is happening. And then as I'm into that feeling, then the actuality of being inside the dream happens. And then I'm more, what do I want to say, faithful, I guess, more precise as to, what it is that's being sent. I try not to use capital letters and punctuation. That helps a lot. Yep. As soon as I go there, I'm into narrative, right? I try not to go into the poetics of it. I try to be just so. When this happens, then this happens. The favored, easiest technique of all time. When, then, to keep in the integrity, the telos of the dream itself. And then after that, I just go with it. And I think, well, this is an expression of imagination. And it's really not as much, well, no, I don't want to say that. I do truly believe in the integrity of the imagery. I also am so conscious of how I will shape the work that I'm doing. So I try to pull myself off of interpretation analysis. So quickly go to, a mythic story that it reminds me of, and then go into that kind of work. I'd rather have the dream itself come to life first. The images present, just be there, present, embodied along with me. And then the images themselves, they invite the associations, the amplifications, and so on.
Yeah, so that's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in one sec too? Because I think about Lockhart's eggs poem, whatever that was, that article you had us read, Stephen. And Dennis, I know when I language it, when it goes from somatic image to words, that's when the puns show up. And then that's when I know I'm in it. Like I'm having a direct, oh, the puns have arrived. I'm in the Imaginal now. Because for me, it's this beautiful dance between the languaging and you have to be careful, but there's this incredible dance there that something happens in this unique consciousness, this human thing that we do with it. So I welcome the puns.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think there is something that goes off in me. You're now making this up. That wasn't part of the dream. But that border is a floating border.
It is a floating border. And let me take this moment, because we're part of the field of dream, all of us here, and all the folks that are listening. I would invite people in this moment in time to take a moment, truly, moment, and let's just follow. When dreams love to be met in the way of dream, they do. They're not as fond of being met in the way of analysis or interpretation, but they love to be met in the way of dream and metaphor and poetry and music. Ugh. So I just suggest for those that are interested and curious, this moment in time, what dream image, who's journeying now? What dream image or figure or landscape or feeling, experience is moving through in this moment in time? And as a community, we can evoke this field. And I would invite all of us to write that down or doodle it, just a quick sketch. Who's journeying now? Who's journeying now? Is that coming from my rational mind? Nah, not in this field. That's why what Will was saying, to be in the shared experience in community is so profound, right? Who's journeying now? And when you have a glimpse of this one's presentation, tonight, next to the bedstand, place it. Fantastic dream incubation this is. And then notice in the morning when eyes, open, and before the day world comes in so quickly, before the cell phone, before the agendas, just notice what dreams in that liminal space, what images of dreams are visiting, and then jot that down. And that would be an extraordinary response to this last conversation that we've just had.
Steve, there's a story that's very well known in the Eastern tradition, many of them, which says that if you give a man a fish, give a person a fish, they eat once. But you teach a man to fish, and you can feed him for a lifetime. And what you're saying is that the intellect or rational mind might get us through the next moment or even the next short period of time, but you start nourishing yourself on curiosity. And curiosity is sustainable. Curiosity is one of those perpetually re-engineering itself inside us. It just builds on itself, and every time you come up with something, you become curiouser and curiouser. As we're coming up to the end of our time here, I really want to thank you so much for the deep substance and the years of service that you've given, not only to Pacifica, but the Anima Mundi. So I'd like us to go out with a sound into a moment of silence. You've been part of us, Steve. We got you on here. This is so good. Thank you all. Dennis and Kayleen and Kelly, Myka, Bree, Vanessa, Will. And what a joy it is to make these. This is, I'm surrounded constantly by brilliant minds. I hope some of it rubs off. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Dana.
Wonderful evening. Wonderful.
Thank you, Steve.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye.
Yes.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everybody.
Congratulations, Steve, on the book.
Oh,
All
thank
right.
you, Dennis.
Congratulations.
Oh, that means so much for me, from you. Thank you.